Hi, welcome to the next introduction to the portraiture project of a series of demos on painting, and certainly sort of looking at using ground and using different sorts of brush techniques in applying paint into what it is that you do. I'm going to go through with you today some of my work and some of my approaches, as well as how to mix paint, how to keep your palette, and different approaches that you could maybe take. So I'll just sort of slide you over to some examples of mine, if you can hopefully sort of see those sufficiently. Some of these are in various different states of completion. So with this piece here, I've worked initially from painting on top of a photograph here. This can be really helpful in terms of learning about what you want your painting to look like. So if you're not confident, this is a good place to start. So you could start by pasting an image down or what have you, and then working on top of it, layering up. You can see in certain instances I've sort of used slightly more textured paint. It's a good way of actually sort of exploring what it is that you're trying to achieve, and how you get certain colours, pigments, and effects. And then obviously if for the purists, it's then drawing it out yourself and exploring in that way. If you get a good result from doing that and you learn, like I did actually, that's how I learned how to mix colour and sort of produce work, that's fine. That's as long as you're not doing it all the time, use it as a tool, use it as a way of exploring paint. And certainly, even if you're mixing the colour and just dabbing a little bit onto a photograph, and identifying the key colours or hues within a piece of work, it can be really, really useful. You can see then how I've sort of worked on that as well. I'm chucking stuff everywhere. So this is obviously not finished. I tend to use, so you can see in the one that I've just chucked on the floor as well. I build it up in layers, so that's my first draft, if you like. I've got a background. I always like to have a background, and then work on top of it. So you can see this one is slightly more finished. I've sprayed, I've got a series of layers on here. I tend to sort of work over something and into something several times. I've got layers of charcoal, varnish, different washes, and I build up sort of quite a bit of detail and depth. So you can sort of see those other examples. I tend to use looser brush strokes in what it is that I'm doing, and maybe sometimes use less control in how I'm applying the paint. You can see in these two here, I was chucking it all on the floor. So you can see in these pieces of work, I tend to use the side of the brush actually, so I've got slightly less control. And so that's a couple of pieces of work. You can see in this piece as well, I'm sort of using sort of glazes of varnish. So a glaze is basically a bit of varnish or glue. If you've got a nice drawing, what you can do as well is you can paste. This comes from Sally, so I have to name check Sally. This technique is if you've got a nice charcoal drawing or a piece of work that you want to work from, you can cover it in PVA and then almost finger paint the paint onto certain areas, and smooth over areas. It's certainly worth trying. I tend to like doing that with charcoal. You can see some of the lines that I've got in there, and then smoothing bits out, retaining some marks that I've left on there as well. So next in this little section, what I wanted to look at as well is mixing colour and how you mix colour. Now, the paints that we use at college are water soluble, and what I would recommend you do is that you look at separating them out, sort of warm and cool, and making sure really that you keep them separate. I would not use colour direct from the tube. Yeah, so I would always mix it, even as a painter. It's something that has been sort of repeatedly told to me over the years, that you should always mix your colours and really sort of look for, creating different shades. Now, the general golden rule is, for warmer colours, and in lighter areas on the face, use warmer colour. Yeah, so in darker areas, you'll use blues and greens, and in sort of the lighter areas, use warmer tones, warmer hues, and it gives us a better depth to what it is that you're doing. My art teacher banned me from using white. You can over white. You can make everything really sort of powdery if you're not careful. If you're oil painting, don't use white spirit to mix your paints. You should use turpentine, because white spirit has a tendency to make your paint kind of chalky and lose some of its vibrancy, really. So have a little look at that and how you sort of approach that. My other advice would be, next to your piece of work, almost sort of identifying what the key colours and hues are, regularly washing out your brush, not overusing white. Yeah, so you can see, if I just use it raw like that, a little bit of white, and often, a little shade of brown. This is impasto medium as well, so you can create sort of quite nice sort of effects within the paint. Nice sort of textured surfaces as well, that you can create, like I have in some of these pieces here. So in some of the examples that I've got, slightly raised areas is where I've used sort of thicker paint. So try and keep your colours separate if you can. Yeah, try and keep things, the warm and the cool, obviously not on as big a piece of board as I've got, but yeah, try and keep them slightly removed. I'm going to just sort of pull you over a little bit to have a closer look whilst I'm having a go at painting here. Now, in one of the previous demos, I got you to look at transferring. So I've got an example here that I've done, and you can see how I have transferred it, I hope, onto the page. So I had it was off an old tabletop, a piece of work that I've taken. I've used this image a couple of times in some of the demonstrations that I've been showing all of you. And you might want to sort of try slightly different applications of paint. You also might want to sort of dilute it slightly. And next to your painting, what you could always do as well is you could always have a look at what things are going to look like before. So you could sort of next to your paintings, you could have like almost like a swatch of colours. I would have this next to your photographs, so that you can sort of really look at your colour mixing. And it's almost like a safety net. So if you don't want to put certain colours in certain areas, then you don't have to. And I tend to sort of use the side of the brush. Now you can use obviously different approaches in how you apply the paint. So using a palette knife, and certainly with the impasto gel, you can get some nice sort of textures and surfaces, right? You might want to build, first of all, a layer of surface up. Mix it here first. And then sort of work onto it. It might be that you just want to sort of add certain details to begin with, let that dry and then come back to it. I've got some areas that I've worked with. Again, you might need a little rag next to you just so that your paints don't become muddy. What I mean by your paints become muddy is that you overmix them and everything becomes a similar hue or similar colour, which you don't really want. Yeah, so try and keep cleaning your brush, your palette knife, or whatever it is that you're working on, so that you retain the colours that you're mixing. Otherwise, they can become sort of, well, you lose all the detail and there's sort of a tone in what it is that you're doing. So that's obviously sort of using a palette knife. Yeah, you could be sort of really sort of dabbing it on and creating quite thick areas, yeah, or using different mark making with what it is that you're putting it on, how you're putting it on. If you're looking at, you get the idea. Okay, so that's the impasto medium. Some of you might have used that for when you're doing a landscape project. Now, some of you might want to use a slightly squarer brush, and when you're applying it, there's a couple of demos that I'll put on Instagram of where people are using slightly less sort of control over what it is that they're doing, and they're applying the paint in quite a gestural way. If you're sort of trying to sort of just sketch out certain areas like that. So there's a couple of different examples that you could take. And then obviously as you build up more depth and more detail, then you can start to possibly use, a finer, smaller brush. And work on details and areas such as around the eyes. So it takes me a while with my painting. I'm not going to sit here and do the whole sitting with you. But I'll keep working on this and sort of update you as it progresses, as my study progresses. But you can sort of see in terms of the stages that I'm going through, and then if I sort of finish it, it can be sort of quite gestural and smeared in some respects, and then you can obviously see in this example, this is where I've sort of built up the layers. Now, very simply, painted background. I use oil pastels to transfer on top, so that's where you can see the eyes and the outlines. That would be how you would get a similar sort of effect. So rub the oil pastel on the back, and then obviously sort of transfer like I showed you in the other video. And then obviously you can, from this point, really build up and sort of layer the surface. Remember, if you want to retain some of these thicker, more gestural marks, then what you'll need to do is certainly let areas dry. So there's some things to certainly try out and have a go at. Hope it goes well.